So the ultimate, I guess, sort of two roles of abdominal bracing is number one to stabilize the spine, and number two is energy transfer, if you will. And that means going from legs into the arms or arms down into the legs. Now, that could be for everyday movements like walking and running, lifting, carrying, whatever it may be, and then moving into exercise where we've then got loads involved. So that could be like a deadlift exercise, or it could be something a little bit more dynamic like a chopping type of exercise, which involves a rotation. Then you can then start talking about, because they're very similar, sporting types of movements like throwing and kicking and things like that. So with regards to a brace, and I guess when we're talking about the spine, how does it stabilize the spine first of all? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to break up into two systems. We're going to break it up into a passive system. We're going to break it up into an active system. So the passive system is kind of what it describes. It's the bones and it's the ligaments. They are just passive tissues. They have a degree of structural integrity, but they just kind of sit there. So that's why they would be known as passive. Then we've got an active tissue, which are the muscles. So they are more active. They respond to loads, they respond to posture and things like that, and they act on the spine. So what we're going to try and do is build, first of all, the passive tissues, which are the vertebra, the discs, and the ligaments. So from that perspective, from the passive perspective, we think of the spine as sort of blocks just loaded on top of each other. So you've got a block, then you've got, let's just say, like a rubber disc in between, and then you've got another block, another rubber disc, another block, another rubber disc. So if we were just to stand that up, it would be a very unstable structure, because it's just one block stacked on top of another with these like rubbery discs in between. So it can wobble, but if you push it, it will probably fall over. What we can then do is then add the ligaments. So we've got a ligament going up the front of the spine, and we've got a ligament going up the back of the spine. So if we then take, I don't know, a strip of tape, for example, and tape the front of the spine together and tape the back of the spine together, what we've done is we've created a degree of stability. So it's more stable than it was without that. So the ligaments, or the tape in our metaphor, are offering a small amount of stability. So if we push it, it won't just crumble. If we push it a little bit, it will probably stay there, but if we push it a lot, it will fall over. So it's offering a degree of stability. So that's the passive tissues. What we can now do is we can now add in the active tissue. So we've got the muscles. So we've got quadratus lumborum. We could have rectus abdominis. We could have transverse abdominis. We can have the obliques. We can have the erector spinae group, or the lumbar sections of the erector spinae group. And again, what we've got there are these active tissues that join onto the vertebra to, again, offer more stability. So in our metaphor, what we would do is we've got our blocks with our rubber sort of sections in between. Then we've got our tape going up the front and going up the back to offer a little bit of stability. What we would then do is take like elastic bands and sort of screw in, or whatever, attach to each rubber block an elastic band. And with the elastic bands, not only do they come off and join on close to the spine, but they also join further away from the spine. So it's like guy wires on a tent, or sort of the wiring system that comes off a sail on a boat. So we've got these elastic bands, and what they have to be as well is tensioned evenly around, because if we've got tension on one side, it's going to pull it to that side. If we've got tension on the other side, it's going to pull it to that side. If we've got tension on the front, it's going to pull it forward, so on and so forth. So again, all these elastic bands that are joined on to each vertebra all the way up and close to the spine and further away, all of those elastic bands have to be evenly tensioned all the way around to maintain the structure being upright. So that is the role of the active tissues. That is the role of the muscles around the torso. So what we start to get are some of the principles of how the core works. So number one, the active tissues and how it works and how we create stability in the spine, and eventually we'll talk about the energy transfer that comes from that. So what happens is when we tense the core, we need to tension it because we talked about elastic bands, so we can create tension. So what we need to be able to do to hold the spine in place, create that tension, but again, it needs to be done evenly. So we don't put adverse stress on front, back, left, or right. So again, it needs to be the tension that we create and the stiffness that we create in the active tissues needs to be done evenly. So when we talk about doing that, we have to talk about all these different muscles because they join onto the spine slightly differently. So we have to create the tension throughout the torso, throughout the rectus abdominis, the obliques, the erector spinae, the quadratus lumborum, so on and so forth. So when we dynamically load the torso, so that could be in different directions, could be more load on the right, could be more load on the left, could be more load to the front, more load to the back. What we've got to do is create tension to balance all of that out. So again, we're trying to create as even tension all around the torso. So when we go into dynamic movement, the body knows how to respond to it. So what we talk about is this tension that we're creating is known as stability. So it's stabilizing the spine. So it's holding it and maintaining its position. So if you listen to a previous tutorial where I talked about neutral spine, the bracing is what holds that neutral spine in place. And when we create tension, it needs to be all the way around and it needs to balance out. So again, if we push on the spine, it doesn't topple over. It doesn't put adverse stress or unnecessary stress around the spine, which is going to create a problem. So what we need to think about is, first of all, stabilizing the spine with the brace, which again is how we activate the tissues, how we activate the core around the spine. So to summarize part one, what we've started to do is create stability through stiffening of the torso muscles, which is known as an abdominal brace, which is going to hold the spine in place and minimize any sort of adverse or unnecessary loads in specific areas. So it's going to distribute load much more effectively. So what we've created is a stable spine. What we're now going to move on to is talking about energy transfer and how we can go about creating stability with regards to dynamic movement.